out on the River Wye once again. It's a lovely afternoon in the middle of March 2022. Some time ago I rather foolishly promised that I was going to talk about fly fishing for salmon with double-handed rods. I thought it's about time I got round to do it now that COVID is calming down and we can get on the river. The most important thing for catching salmon on a fly in a river like this is to get the fly in the right place, in the right way. Rods, reels, doesn't matter. The really important things are you and the line. It's the line that does 99% of the work. So that's what we're going to talk about first. I've got two different lines here, and I'm going to show you both of those and show you what the differences are and how they go on the cotton reel. I'm not a professional, I'm not an expert, I'm not trying to sell anything. I'm just going to show you what I've got. Two different lots. I've got three, but I'm going to show you two. Anyway, bear with me and I'll get round to showing you in a minute. Right, what I'm going to show you is the line that I use most, and that is called, it's made by Rio, the manufacturer. It comes in a kit. It has everything in the kit that you need to be able to get a fly in front of a salmon in a big river. Starting at the sharp end, literally, with the fly, which I haven't debarbed yet, you'll notice, which is naughty, I think, but I will, honest. That is connected to a clear nylon tippet or leader. I always get the ones that are either 9 feet or 12 feet long. They're tapered, and at this skinny end they're 20 pounds breaking strain, and they get gradually thicker as you go towards the reel. Right? So it's nice and thin at this end, 20 pounds breaking strain. It then gradually gets thicker and thicker and ends up at about 60 to 80 pounds breaking strain by the time you get to the first of your joins. This, simply because of the way I like to fish and because I fish some pretty deep pools like this one here, which is currently 10 to 12 feet deep. What's not part of the kit, but I do add to it, is another section of line which is made by Airflow, and it's a extra super fast sinking tip. Sounds sexy, doesn't it? Anyway, that is a bit like lead core. It's incredibly heavy and it causes the end of the line to sink into the pool very quickly. That has got a loop at the end, and that loop connects to another loop, simply done, onto the Rio, what they call the tips. Now you get 3 tips in the kit. This one is the intermediate, which means it doesn't float, it doesn't sink very quickly. But when it's got this heavy thing on the end, it gets dragged down into the water and gets the fly nice and deep. So this is the intermediate. The reason I use the intermediate is that should I want to take this heavy one off and put the nylon straight onto this loop, it doesn't sink quickly, it sinks very, very slowly, and that's ideal for if I go into somewhere where the water's shallower and faster. Anyway, so this is the intermediate tip. Now this is 10 feet long, and that runs all the way and has a loop at the end, and that loop connects to another loop which is on the next piece of the line, which is the floating section, and it's the floating section that gives the whole system the weight to chuck it out in the river. And this floating system, you notice the thickness of the intermediate tip and the thickness here of the floating system are about the same, but it very quickly fattens out after about 10 feet or 3 meters. It gets very thick, very fat, and this is the floating section. Now the floating section is about 23 feet long, and that's what really gives you the weight to chuck it out across the river. This is the bit you chuck out into the river. But that is connected to another loop-to-loop join to what they call the running line. Okay, now the running line, or the shooting line, is slightly different colour, and that is very thin, incredibly strong, and it doesn't bend very much. It's quite stiff. And the whole point of that is that when you cast the thick floating section out into the river, this literally shoots out after it. So you get your distance. And I'll be demonstrating that with a few casts later. Right, so this is your shooting line. And that is fairly long. Whoop, hang on, missed the join. And that is weld joined straight into this pale greeny yellowy stuff. And that is your backing. That's the backing line. This is the line that when you get a big fish, this is what goes flying off down the river behind all the rest of it and stops you either snapping the line, pulling the hook out of the fish's mouth, or the fish pulling you off your feet into the river, okay? And that is quite long. That's about 100 metres. And that, we'll just follow the rod down until we get to the reel. And you can see that the rest of the backing line is on the reel. Now some people make a big fuss about how you join this backing line to this reel, or any reel. But if it's 100, it could even be 200 metres, I can't remember now, but even if it's 100 metres long and you've got another 40 metres of line out, if the salmon's got that far away from you, as the Australians would say, you're buggered, mate. Because it's gone round 3 rocks, a tree stump and 6 canoeists by now, and you're never going to get the fish back. So don't worry about how you tie it to the reel. Any old granny knot will do, as long as it doesn't come undone. Should a 30-pound fish rip all that lot straight off your reel and go tearing off down the river, well, if you've let that happen, you haven't set the clutch or the brake on your reel properly. Anyway, we'll follow this line back again now, just to recap. We'll try not to mess up all the shadows. Anyway, the yellow backing, 100 metres of it, all the way up until that is weld joined up to the shooting line, the orange shooting line. And this is the really tough stuff, and this has got like a weird coating on it which makes it really slippery, so it shoots out through the eyes of the rod. And this bit is in your hands, looped in your hands when you cast, curled up, and that's a loop-to-loop to the shooting head, the floating bit, the really heavy bit. Now normally when you're casting, your rod eye, the top eye of your rod, is normally around about here somewhere, and this loop-to-loop join here, this loop here, is outside the tip of the rod, and it's this big heavy bit that you swing around about your head like a loon and flick about, signing your name in the sky like all these professional show-offs do. And this is the bit that you flick out across the river, and it pulls the stuff that's in your hands behind it. So you cast the floating stuff and the shooting stuff shoots off after it, and that's how you get the weight, because this is really thick and heavy, but it floats. And that, after 23 feet, oh, there we are, loop to loop, that goes into, now I've got the intermediate tip on, but you can get floating tips for the summer to keep the fly up on near the surface, or you could get, well, you can get lots of different tips. Some of them sink at 15 inches per second, which is ludicrously fast. This is an intermediate. If I'm not using the intermediate, I'll be using a one that sinks at about 6 inches per second. But all you have to do is undo the loop-to-loop join and put the other tip on. and you get 3 in the set. So for your £180 from Rio, you get 3 different ones of these. You get a floating one, you get this intermediate one, and you get a sinking one. And then you can buy other sinking ones if you want to. I use the 10 foot because that's what I'm used to. So that's 10 foot long, and that ends with a loop, which has actually come off the core here, which is not good, but it'll hold a fish. I then connect, as I said, I then connect this 1 meter long, very heavy extra tip, which I tie knot to knot to the nylon. Now these nylon tippets or leaders, they often come with a loop in them, and then you can tie that loop to the intermediate floating or sinking head. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Well, I'm going to reel all this lot back onto the reel in a minute, and I'll speed it up, but at least then you'll see how it all fits together. Now, while I'm walking back to the fishing rod, I'm just going to show you an alternative system, and this is called the Game Changer, and this is quite new. It's almost the exact same sort of setup, except it all comes without your loop-to-loop joins. It's all welded, moulded joins. So again, you've still got your nylon leader with your fly on the end. That goes loop to loop, and I've now got a sinking section. This is my sinking tip. Not an intermediate, this is the sinking tip. And that goes loop to what is now the beginning of the Game Changer setup. Now the thing with the Game Changer setup is you could get various different layouts of it, but it all comes in one solid line. You can't take it apart. This one, at the fly, towards the fly end, it has a sinking section, and then instead of joining loop to loop with the floating or intermediate, it blends. It's welded, you see. It just blends from one type, it blends through and immediately becomes an intermediate section, and then that blends into a floating section. It just takes all these loop to loop joints out of the system, and then that ends with a loop which goes on a loop to the shooting bit. Now this is your shooting line, different colour. On the other one it was orange, this one it's grey. And that's mostly so you could tell the difference when they're either in your bag or on a different reel. You could tell. You see, this is long again, this is about 100 metres long. And this goes on and 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 on until you get to what I've wrapped around this post, the reel with, and there's the shooting line, what's left of it, on the reel. Now under that shooting line, just to pack the reel out a bit, I've added what they call, it's Rio Dacron backing, and it's literally to fill up the spool of the reel, because otherwise the fly line would be down inside there, and you don't want that. You want the reel as full as possible when it's loaded. Anyway, we will now just put this down, and I will reel in my favourite line, and we'll just watch it as it goes on the reel, and you'll see, just to let you know exactly how it goes again. I'm going to switch to another camera now, so we'll turn this one off and we'll come back to the other camera. It's okay, we've only got another couple of minutes to go and then we can go fishing. Alright? Right, so we're on a different camera now. This is my chest camera, as I normally use for while I'm fishing. Sorry if there's been a change in volume of audio, but right, I'm doing this so you can actually see the line going on. Now this is the backing line, the yellow, and winding back on, and you can see how full the reel is at the moment and how much space there is in there. Now when you're casting, if we just stop here for a moment, and I'll change the angle of the camera so you can see how far it is to that post. That's the distance you'd normally be fishing at. There's no need to fish further than that, because if you want to fish further than that, either go across to the other bank or get a boat. And to be honest, most of the fish I've caught on fly, I've caught on my side of the river below me, not on the far side. You very rarely hook a fish on the far side on a fly, because the fly isn't working properly, as they call it. They call it working. When it's fluttering at the right depth, moving at the right speed, oh, there we are. This is the shooting line. Shooting line's just appeared. So there's the orange shooting line. So we'll wind that on. Now that is normally outside the rod when the fly is in the water. And and there's the loop. And we now come loop to loop to the floating bit. Now this is the floating section. This is the bit that gives you the weight to actually get it to go out across the river. Because this is quite heavy, this floating stuff. And that, when we get to it, if I don't trip over another rock, gets to another loop. And now here we've got this intermediate tip. So the tip is the one that sinks just below the surface. And I've got caught up somewhere now. Right, and we're coming in, and this is we're almost at the fly now, so we'll have to put the rod down. But you can see how loaded the reel is. See, and that's what you want. You want a nice full reel like that, and when we put it on its side, you can see all the different colours, like a rainbow. Anyway, and that is the Rio Versatip or Versatip system. 180 odd quid. Now the thing is, you think, well, that's a lot of money, but the backing line, the shooting line and all the rest of it you don't have to replace for years. That'll last years. The only bit I would replace would be the floating section after maybe 3 years, and that will cost you about 25-30 quid. And every now and again you have to replace these tippets, these leaders, sorry, not tippets, leaders. And this one needs replacing because you see the plastic coating has come off the nylon core here, which is a shame. But I've got spare ones, or I could put a sinking one on, or I could put a floating one on. These are airflow tips. These are airflow sink tips, and they're about 5-6 quid at a time. They do have a loop on them, but I cut them shorter. That's just a personal preference. You do not need that. You can go and put your nylon tip or tippet straight onto your Rio setup, and that gets smaller and smaller and gets thinner and thinner until it gets to 20 pounds breaking strain, and the sharp little fly that I'm about to get stuck in my finger if I'm not careful. There we are, and there's a little fly which needs the barbs crushing on it, and that just ties on the end like that. And that, boys and girls, is pretty much it. So the next thing to do is to have a look at some casting and how that's done. I hope that's been simple enough. It's a very complex thing, all this fly line business, but if in doubt, just look up Rio, look at the Versatip, and just get the weight of line kit that matches your rod. And if you're not sure what that is, we'll look at that in another video. But basically, if it's a 9 to 10 rate rod, get a 9 rate line setup. And if you get something that's slightly lighter than you need, you can always add bits. It's easier to add bits to your line than it is to take bits away. Anyway, that's enough of that. I'm going to go and paddle about in that now and get wet and chuck a fly in and see if there's a salmon around. Problem with this pool is if you do hook one, they tend to go off down there between one set of posts, turn around and come back up between the next set of posts. I kid you not, it has happened. Not to me, thankfully. I never let the buggers get that far. But then maybe that's why I keep losing them. Hey ho. Anyway, on this wonderful March day in Herefordshire in the UK, 2022, I'll catch you next time. Cheers.